and proprietor of New Leaf Natural Therapies.
That's me.
Madonna, we're talking about gut health right now, and so why is it so important that we have good gut health?
Because if your gut isn't digesting things properly, you're not making everything properly in your body. So every time you eat anything, if you don't break that down, you can be really putting challenges on your immune system. You think about immune system stuff, cancer's the long-term, result of dysfunctional immune system. So when you are talking about things like having intolerances that we just eat on a daily basis and then don't repair our gut, because every time we have an intolerance or an allergy that we eat, we're putting a strain on our immune system every time. So we can, of course, manage this with medications. There's lots of medications. People get, reflux and heartburn and all sorts of things. There's a drug for everything, obviously, and lots of people manage their lives simply by taking something else. Whereas from a natural perspective, we're always trying to bring people back into health. So the bone broth recipe I've got, it's recommended by Dr. Joseph McCullough. He's a dude in America he's been writing articles about health for over 20 years. He's really quite amazing. And he's worked with the GAPS diet for a long, long time, so the gut and psychology syndrome diet. And he's interviewed the researcher who's put so much of many years of her research life into that as well, and found that the better the gut is, the better our overall health is. So when our gut isn't good, it can create any health problem. Even to the perspective of people with heart disease and diabetes and that sort of thing, they're actually finding particles in the gut lining that's creating low-level inflammation that can be creating inflammation leading to diseases like even just good old blood pressure.
Right.
Once again, over the age of 40, 50% of people have blood pressure issues, and of them only about 25% are properly managed via blood pressure medications. Now, that's not the fault of the drug and it's not the fault of the doctors. Let's face it, as human beings, we have to take a lot of this on ourselves. What are we eating and what are we drinking? Are we actually getting a good night's sleep? Are we getting sunshine? Are we doing some exercise? What are we doing in our health to help that along? Medications aren't the only answer, obviously.
So you're saying you've got to cut down from 5 bacon egg sandwiches to maybe 2?
Well, it's starting to have a look and then going, okay, well, why am I doing that? Like if we're starving all the time and we're constantly hungry, there's something going on in the background as well. So if we need 5 bacon and egg sandwiches, something's going on with our blood sugar, something's going on with our hormones that aren't telling our brain we're full. So it's not just... I don't think it is actually just a greedy society. There was research done back in the 1960s where they very deliberately found the correct combination of carbohydrates and dodgy fats that make us addicted to these foods. We're addicted to these foods because scientists put together a really good formula that make us addicted to stuff.
Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence now about addiction to sugar.
Absolutely.
And how the sugar lobby presses to make sure that focus is moved away from
That's
sugar
right.
and more on. There was that study in the United States that was specifically designed to show that it's lack of exercise, not too much sugar that's causing obesity.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because because SBS often has things on that type of study that they're doing. And I often watch them. And I spoke to a researcher at a congress a couple of years ago, and she had done a high-fat diet and found that it was bad for people. At the same congress, I had a guy whose research is in ketogenesis, which is 70% fat in the diet, and he had found that it's phenomenal for people. Now, 2 different researchers, 2 different results. The interesting thing was that the guy who was a South African researcher, he had people who were triathletes and, really top of their game, marathon runners, and they were eating healthy fats. Now, that seems like a simple thing, but when I spoke to the woman researcher from Adelaide who had done the high-fat diets, they didn't have much of a budget. So when they did their high-fat diet, they were eating rubbish, just rubbish, the sort of thing no naturopath would ever say, yeah, do a high-fat diet, that'll be good for you. Not with the foods they were doing. That's absolutely carcinogenic, blood pressure raising, diabetic forming. So I'm not surprised that because we chatted to her over the break, she didn't tell us what the foods were during the presentation where she said high-fat diet is bad for you. It was over the break when we had a chat. She happened to sit at our table and I was like, well... is that really good research then? Sort of made me a little bit crazy, because it sort of almost feels like a research designed to go wrong, so, and then I do, my skeptical brain goes, who paid for that research? Was it someone who wanted that answer?
Yeah.
Because surely If because there's so much research that high-fat diets like the GAPS diet and ketogenics diets, I've got practitioner friends who actually work predominantly with cancer and that type of thing, and they use the ketogenic diet to shrink cancer cells. So you know that cancer cells actually thrive on sugar.
Right.
Like there's actually been a few Nobel Prizes given to researchers over the last 100 years about that. But of course, science tries to quench that information because, of course, it's such a huge industry. So people who have a ability to develop cancer and have a sugar craving, they've got to sort of start thinking about what that might be doing in their body. And once again, some people don't care. They trust the medical system so much, whatever will happen will happen. Once again, that's fine. But it's a sweet, acidic environment that cancer thrives in.
Okay. So what's the... Do you want to go through that recipe now? So
the recipe is a bone broth, and basically, so it's found on drmccullough.com, and he got it from the GAPS diet, so the GAPS diet queen. So, and it does take somewhere between 1 and 3 days to do, because the whole point of it is getting the bone marrow out of the bones. If you don't boil it long enough, it's not going to work. So basically what you want is about 1.5 kilos of beef marrow and knuckle bones. You can use any bones, any animal, by the way. Organic is always best. Grass-fed's, great as well. About a kilo of meaty bones, such as short ribs. About half a cup of raw apple cider. So apple cider vinegar, and what you do, you boil those down with a couple of litres of water. Just boil them for an hour or so, and the vinegar actually helps to loosen the bone marrow from the bones. Then you add more water if you need to, and then you add the veggies. So the veggies are some celery, some carrots. So about 3 celery stalks, 3 carrots, 3 onions, halve them, quarter them, chuck them in. And once again, water enough to cover the veggies. And that is when you just start simmering. Simmer, simmer, simmer. 1 to 3 days.
1 to 3 days?
1 to 3 days.
How do you know it's not 1 day or 3 days, it's 2 days?
You sort of, the bones will actually get a little bit spongy. You'll see the bone marrow coming out of the bones.
Okay.
And if it's not coming out yet, there's no point taking it. Otherwise, it's just like a nice watery broth.
Right.
Yeah, so it's all about the bone marrow coming out.
Okay.
And different bones will release the bone marrow at different rates.
Okay.
So then you boil them for 24 to 72 hours, and in the last 10 minutes you throw in some, salt and parsley, for minerals and flavour and that sort of thing. And basically, you take about, you need really about 2 to 3 cupfuls a day if you're going to start healing your gut. But that is amazing. And the reason it's amazing is because it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it. So it's got gelatin, and gelatin is a hydrophilic nutrient that helps to suck nutrients towards it. So while it's in the gut, it's keeping the digestive enzymes in there. It's keeping the nutrients in there so that your body can heal that gut. It reduces joint inflammation and pain. So people who take glucosamine and chondroitin tablets, those sort of supplements, that's the stuff we're getting out of the bone marrow. So if people say, I can't afford it, this is cheap. This is cheap.
Well, I mean, soup bones are, pennies a kilo. So.
Exactly. Yeah, and things like infections. Good old, the old, I've never had a nana or a grandma who made it for me, but the good old chicken soup. The reason it's so beneficial for us is because of the gelatin and the minerals that come out of the bones. So in the bones, there's also heaps of calcium and magnesium and the other type of cofactors that help to build healthy joints. So when our joints start playing up, make yourself some bone broth. Have a couple of cupfuls every day. Cheap, easy, and basically by the time you do that, it's about 340 calories per couple of cupfuls. So it's really nutritious, very easy to digest, really good for the gut. Now, one of the things about leaky gut is that depending on our genetics and where our problems are, we can end up with leaky gut, leaky brain. That's where the gut bugs can get up into the brain and be linked to things like autism, ADHD, ASD, those sort of problems, or even anxiety, depression, that sort of stuff. If we are linked to stuff like psoriasis and eczema and dermatitis, so skin problems like that, it can be leaky gut, leaky skin. And I know this is really simplistic, but if people start thinking about it, like what am I eating, what symptoms am I getting? The other thing is asthma, by the way. You can end up with leaky gut, leaky lungs. And one of the things about 20, 30 years ago they started doing was giving people with leaky gut or with gut problems lots of slippery elm tablets. Now, slippery elm does create like a slimy mucus layer on the gut wall, which basically protects it from those bugs that we're creating by our bad diet. So sometimes what they found was that people with asthma would accidentally start having better lung activity when they were taking lots of slippery elm. And that makes no sense. At the time, it made no sense because the slippery elm never leaves the gut. It doesn't, it stays in the gut. It's very mechanical in the way it works. You take it before a meal and it sops up acid that's sitting in the gut. You take it after a meal, it can sop up the fermented stuff we've done. You sort of take it between meals and it's just lining it and coating it and creating a layer. So same with the bone broth, works in a very similar way. By calming down the gut, there's all these co-reactions that happen around the body and help whatever part of the body is linked in with your leaky gut.
With that recipe, that's great for people like yourself and me who love a good steak occasionally.
Yes.
Is there something that vegetarians can do that will have a similar sort of action, or are they going to be relying on medication?
It's definitely more challenging for vegetarians because it's hard to get the protein levels out of... I was vegetarian for 20 years and it's really then about finding the right combination of amino acids. It is more challenging, but even a lot of herbs. You can then go to herbs like meadowsweet and slippery elm or supplements that have glucosamine, because there are ways of getting vegetarian glucosamine. Vegan gets even more expensive and more challenging again. Vegetarian is slightly easier because you do have some animal products in there. Live animal products for vegetarians, unless they choose not. Like dairy and eggs. Yes, so lacto-ovo vegetarians will often choose to do that. So there's lots of really good stuff that vegetarians can do as well, but it's very much about getting that gut lining. There's lots of herbs. There's lots of other ways to skin a cat, so to speak. Not those bones.
All right, thanks very much. We'll be back in just a minute. We're going to go to another track, and here's the Eagles with Desperado.